The alien world of Velthra had once been full of color and music. But now the sky was black with smoke, and the air carried the smell of burning metal. The city's towers, which used to shine under the twin suns, were now broken and leaning. In the capital, deep under the streets, hundreds of frightened Velthrans hid inside a giant underground bunker. The walls shook every few minutes as explosions rumbled far above. Dust drifted from the ceiling with each blast. Inside the bunker, the Velthran leaders gathered in a circle. They spoke in low voices, their faces pale. They had sent out hundreds of distress calls to every known friendly world, but no one had answered. Months had passed, and the enemy fleet had grown larger and stronger. Everyone knew what it meant. No one was coming to help. The Velthrans were on their own. Some of the elders whispered that it was better to surrender now than to watch their people be destroyed. Others argued that surrender would only lead to slavery, but the truth was bitter. Their defenses were almost gone. The enemy, a ruthless empire that conquered and enslaved worlds, was just hours away from breaking through the last shield generators protecting the capital. In one corner of the bunker, a young officer named Lyra sat quietly, listening to the arguments. She had served in the defense forces since she was old enough to hold a blaster. She had seen friends and family lost in the battles. Her armor was scratched, her uniforms stained with dust and smoke, but her eyes still held a spark, a stubborn spark that refused to believe this was the end. Above them, the sound of enemy weapons was constant. The bunker's air was heavy and warm, filled with the quiet sobs of children and the worried murmurs of their parents. Some people sat clutching bags with all they could carry, a few clothes, some food, and small keepsakes from home. Others just stared at the floor, empty-eyed, as if their minds had already given up. An elder named Vorin stepped forward to speak. His voice was rough and slow, but clear. "We have sent our calls for help to every corner of the galaxy," he said, "and there has been no reply. The truth is before us. No one is coming." The words seemed to suck the last bit of hope out of the air. People lowered their heads, some covering their faces. Even the military officers looked away, not wanting to meet each other's eyes. Lyra felt her chest tighten, but she kept looking at the sealed metal door at the far end of the bunker. Beyond that door, above the ground, was the night sky. She wanted to see it, even if it was filled with enemy ships. She thought about the old stories her father used to tell about a time when the galaxy feared the Terran Navy. Humans, they were called. Fighters from a far-off world who never abandoned an ally. But that was long ago. No one had seen a human fleet in decades, and some said they no longer had the power to fight. Still, the thought of those stories kept a small ember of hope alive. In her heart, another explosion boomed above, shaking the bunker hard enough to make the lights flicker. The sound of panic spread through the crowd. A child cried out, and her mother pulled her close. A soldier ran in from the hall, his voice urgent. "The last outer shield is failing," he reported to the leaders. "We won't hold for long." Lyra watched the elders exchange looks. She could see it in their eyes. They were already deciding what form of surrender would cause the least suffering. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them not to give up, but her voice caught in her throat. She knew that even if she spoke, what could she say? They had no allies, no reinforcements, no hope. The minutes dragged on. Every so often, the ground shook again, dust drifting from the ceiling. The bunker felt smaller with each passing moment, as if the walls were closing in. Lyra leaned her head back, closing her eyes, trying to imagine the open sky. She pictured stars, thousands of them, and in her mind she imagined the dark shapes of ships coming out of the void, ships with the old Terran Navy insignia gleaming on their sides. She tried to believe it, even if it was only a dream. Then, in the silence between explosions, Lyra felt something strange. It was faint, so faint she thought she had imagined it, but it was there. A deep vibration in the air, not like the sharp blasts of weapons, but a steady, distant hum, like a great engine far away. She opened her eyes and looked toward the ceiling, her heart beating faster. No one else seemed to notice at first. Elders kept whispering about surrender. The children still whimpered. And the soldiers stood by the walls, tense and ready. But Lyra kept listening. The hum was growing stronger. She didn't know what it was, and she didn't dare say it aloud. But a tiny thought flashed through her mind. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone after all, and for the first time. In months, Lyra felt the cold weight of despair loosen just a little, replaced by something she had almost forgotten: hope. Far beyond the war zone, in a quiet stretch of space where few ships ever traveled, a small human scout vessel drifted through the dark. Its hull was dull and scratched from years of patrol duty, and its crew had spent weeks scanning empty skies for signs of pirate activity. The stars outside were cold and silent, but inside the ship, the crew kept themselves busy, checking instruments and running routine sweeps at the main console. Lieutenant Mara was yawning when something unusual appeared on her screen. A tiny spike of energy, faint, almost lost in the static, had been picked up by the long-range receiver. She leaned closer, narrowing her eyes, and began running a filter to clean the signal. At first, it was just noise, a jumble of beeps and broken tones, but then a pattern started to form. Her hands froze over the controls as she realized it was not random interference. It was a distress signal. She quickly called out to the captain. "Sir, I'm picking up something strange on long range. Possible emergency transmission." Commander Elias Graves entered the room within seconds. He was a tall, weathered man, his uniform worn from years of service. "Let me hear it," he said. Mara tapped a key, and the sound filled the control room, a faint repeating pulse followed by bursts of static. The message was weak and broken, but it was clearly encoded. The commander leaned over the console. "Run it through the old Alliance frequency filters," he ordered. Mara hesitated. "Sir, those codes haven't been used in decades. We don't even have active allies in that sector anymore." "Do it," Graves said firmly. The computer processed the signal, and slowly, words began to emerge through the static. It was a call for help. Desperate. Urgent. Coordinates appeared on the screen. They were deep in hostile territory, inside a region of space the United Terran Navy had not entered in half a century. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. Everyone knew that area was controlled by the Zareth Dominion, a brutal empire known for wiping out entire species. No one survived long there. "Could be a trap," Mara said quietly. "Or it could be real," Graves replied. His eyes didn't leave the screen. Something in his voice told the crew he was already leaning toward one decision. Prepare to send this to High Command. Within the hour, the scout ship was transmitting a full report to Earth. They included the decoded message, the coordinates, and a note from Commander Graves himself. "Urgent. This is not a false alarm." While they waited for a response, the crew talked in low voices. Some thought the commander was taking too big a risk. Others argued that humanity had once been known for stepping in when no one else would, and maybe it was time to remind the galaxy of that. 3 hours later, a reply came. High Command seal flashed across the screen, and a stern voice came. Over the comms, "Commander Graves, your report has been received and verified. The signal matches treaty codes from the Velthran Alliance, dated over 70 years ago. Their leaders swore mutual defense in times of crisis. Stand by for orders." The crew held their breath. The next words would decide their fate. Directive from the United Terran Navy, the voice continued. "Effective immediately, all available fleets are to be mobilized for deep space deployment. Priority Alpha, the Velthrans have called for aid." Earth will answer. The control room went silent for a moment, and then the energy shifted. Crew members looked at one another with wide eyes. This wasn't a routine mission anymore. This was. History in the making. Graves gave a sharp nod. Set a course for home. We're going to bring the fleet. The scout ship turned, engines roaring to life. As they jumped into hyperspace, Mara couldn't help but glance at the fading stars behind. Them somewhere out there, a planet was dying. She wondered if they would get there in time. Back in the Velthran bunker, Lyra still sat with her head tilted slightly, listening to that faint hum in the air. She didn't know it yet, but far away, humans were already moving. Messages had been sent, orders signed. And shipyards were about to awaken from decades of quiet. And in the heart of the Terran Navy's command center, alarms were sounding, not in panic, but in preparation. Ancient warships that had been in storage for years were being pulled from their docks. Engineers ran through the corridors, shouting to one another. Weapons bays were unlocked. On the scout ship's bridge, Graves stood by the forward viewport. Watching the streaks of hyperspace, he thought about the Velthrans, a people most humans had never met, bound to Earth by a promise made generations ago. That promise was dusty and forgotten in the history books, but to Graves, it mattered. A promise was a promise. When they reached the Sol system, the view from the bridge changed. Space stations the size of small cities floated near Earth's orbit. Huge construction docks wrapped around the skeletons of warships, some already being fueled, others still waiting for final assembly. But as the scout ship approached, something extraordinary happened. The dormant docks lit up one by one. Massive carrier ships, their hulls gleaming under the sun, began to move. Graves knew what this meant. Earth was not sending a token rescue force. This was a full deployment. A statement to the galaxy. Humanity had not gone soft. Humanity still remembered its word. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a grim satisfaction. The Zareth Dominion might have thought the Velthrans were alone. They were about to find out how wrong they were. In the vast blackness of space above Earth, the shipyards came alive like a sleeping giant waking from a long, deep slumber. For decades, the docks had been quiet, used only for maintenance of small patrol ships and cargo haulers. Now, every light was burning bright, every crane and repair arm moving at full speed. Workers in sleek spacesuits floated along the sides of massive vessels, welding panels, connecting power lines, and loading weapons. Across the planet, orders had gone out to every military base. Soldiers who thought they would never see a major deployment in their lifetime were suddenly packing their gear. Pilots rushed to their fighter bays. Engineers dusted off old manuals for warships that hadn't been flown in years. And families gathered in tearful goodbyes. In orbit, the first of the great ships stirred. They were massive, kilometers long, with armored hulls that could withstand direct hits from planet-killer weapons. Their names were legendary. ISS Valiant, TNS Invictus, Sol's Wrath. These weren't patrol ships. They were the pride of Earth's Navy, the kind of ships that, when they appeared, changed the course of wars. Commander Elias Graves stood on the command deck of the TNS Horizon, watching as the fleet assembled. His scout ship had already been docked and refitted, now a small part of something much larger. Through the enormous windows, he could see wave after wave of ships leaving their berths, engines glowing bright as they moved into formation. The fleet wasn't just made of warships. Support cruisers, medical frigates, supply haulers, every type of vessel was coming together. The mission wasn't only to fight. It was to survive deep in enemy space and to bring back those they saved. That meant food, medicine, and repair. Crews had to travel alongside the fighters and destroyers. On the far side of the orbital ring, old battleships that had been sitting in mothball storage were being reactivated. Their engines roared to life for the first time in decades. Dust and ice cracked away from their armor as they powered up. One by one, they moved into the light, their Terran Navy insignias shining proudly down on Earth. Entire cities paused to watch news networks broadcast live images of the fleet's awakening. People filled rooftops and streets, looking up at the sky. Even children who didn't fully understand what was happening could sense it. Something important was unfolding. For the first time in a long while, the world felt united in the Central Command Hall. Admirals reviewed star charts and enemy fleet reports. They knew the risks. The Zareth Dominion controlled the Velthran sector with an iron grip. Sending a fleet this deep into their territory could start a full-scale war. But the decision had been made. The promise to the Velthrans would be kept. One admiral, a woman named Admiral Karis, stood before the assembly of officers. Her voice carried the weight of the moment. Our allies are facing extinction. Called for help. We have answered. This fleet represents not just Earth, but the honor of humanity itself. When we arrive, we will show the galaxy what it means to stand by your word. Her words were met with silence, not because the officers disagreed, but because every one of them understood what it meant. Many might not return, yet no one stepped back. The preparation continued without pause. Weapons were tested, railguns, firing in empty space, missiles loaded into launch bays, and fighter squadrons running practice maneuvers. The hum of activity was constant. Every ship's crew worked as if time itself were chasing them. Commander Graves moved through the corridors of the horizon, checking on his crew. They were focused, their eyes sharp. Mara, the communications officer who had first found the Velthran. Signal was seated at her station, scanning long-range channels for any enemy movement. She caught Graves' eye and gave a small nod. "Everything ready?" he asked. "As ready as we'll ever be," she replied. There was a slight smile on her face, but he could see the tension in her hands. Finally, the call came from High Command. "Fleet is green. Prepare for hyperspace departure." From the surface of Earth, the night sky lit up with dozens of bright flares as the great engines fired. In orbit, the ships began to align in perfect formation, their bows pointed toward the dark expanse beyond friendly space. The largest vessels moved first, slow and steady, followed by the cruisers, the frigates, and finally the escort ships. Graves took one last look at Earth through the viewport. He thought of the Velthrans, waiting in fear under that blackened sky. He thought of the young officer, though he didn't know her name, who might be somewhere in that bunker, wondering if help would ever come. The navigation officer's voice broke the silence. "All ships reporting ready for jump." Graves gave a single, sharp nod. "Then, let's go bring them home." A deep vibration filled the horizon as its hyperdrive charged. Outside, space began to twist and shimmer. One by one, the ships of Earth's most powerful fleet vanished into streaks of light, tearing across the void toward a battle that would decide the fate of an entire world. Back on Velthra, the night was silent except for the distant thud of enemy weapons. Lyra still sat in the dim light of the bunker, the faint hum she had felt earlier now gone. She wondered if she had only imagined it. She didn't know that at that very moment, across the endless dark, an armada of steel and fire was racing toward her planet faster than any fleet had moved in a generation. The bunker walls trembled again, sending a thin layer of dust drifting down from the ceiling. The air felt heavier now, thick with the smell of burned wiring and smoke that had seeped in from above. Somewhere far overhead, the capital city of Velthra was still burning. The enemy had been bombarding for hours, testing the last of the shield generators that stood between them and total destruction. Inside the bunker, people were restless. Some paced back and forth, others sat with their heads buried in their hands. The elders whispered in a corner, their voices tense. Even the soldiers looked exhausted, armor dented, uniforms scorched, eyes red from lack of sleep. Everyone knew the truth, but no one wanted to say it out loud. They couldn't hold out much longer. Lyra stood near the entrance tunnel, her back against the cold metal wall. She could hear the distant thunder of the bombardment, each blast echoing through the ground. She imagined the enemy ships above, their massive cannons glowing as they fired again and again. The city she had once walked through freely was now a battlefield she couldn't even step into. A young child tugged at her sleeve. His eyes were wide, his small hands clutching a frayed blanket. "Is it true?" he asked softly. "Will they break through?" Lyra swallowed hard before answering. "Not yet," she said, forcing her voice to sound steady. "We still have the shields." But even as she said it, a deep, booming explosion rattled the bunker harder than before. The lights flickered, and a moment later, an officer rushed in, his face pale. "The last shield generator is failing," he shouted. The words spread like fire through the bunker. Mothers held their children tighter, elders muttered prayers, and soldiers moved toward the weapons racks. Everyone knew what would happen once the shield fell. The enemy would come down like a storm, and no one inside would be spared. Lyra felt her chest tighten. She had prepared herself to die fighting, but what about the families? The children? The thought made her hands clench into fists. The bombardment outside grew louder, closer. The enemy ships were moving into position for the final strike. And then, something changed. It was subtle at first, so faint that most didn't notice it. A low vibration hummed through the ground, not the sharp, jarring shock of explosions, but a steady, deep thrum. Lyra's eyes widened. She had felt something like this before, but only once. Years ago, during a training exercise when a massive transport ship entered the atmosphere, she stepped toward the sealed blast door and pressed her ear against it. The sound was growing, rolling through the air like the heartbeat of a giant dot. The elders continued their hurried discussion, ignoring it. The soldiers didn't notice, they were too busy checking their rifles and sidearms. But a few people near the door paused, frowning. They heard it too. The enemy bombardment suddenly slowed. The sky above the bunker seemed to hesitate. There was a moment, just a breath of silence, before a new sound tore through the air. It was distant, but powerful, like thunder that didn't belong to the storm already raging. The ground shook again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the vibration of weapons hitting shields. It was something far larger passing overhead. A soldier ran in from the outside lookout post, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Something's entering the atmosphere," he shouted. "Not enemy ships. These are, I don't even know what they are." Before anyone could question him, the bunker's comm system crackled to life with a scrambled, static-filled transmission. The signal was broken, but one thing was clear. It wasn't the enemy's language. The voice spoke in sharp, clipped words, too distorted to fully understand. But to Lyra, one sound stood out. A word she had heard only in old Alliance records: Terran. Her heart pounded. Could it be? Above the planet, high in the thinning clouds, shadows began to form. At first, they were just dark specks against the smoke-filled sky. Then they grew larger, shapes breaking through the clouds like massive steel beasts. Dozens of them, the enemy fleet scrambled. Ships broke formation, moving to intercept the newcomers. The air was filled with streaks of light as weapons fired. But the incoming ships didn't slow in the bunker. The hum grew into a deep roar. People pressed themselves against the walls, looking up toward the ceiling as if they could see through it. The children clung to their parents, not out of fear now, but confusion. Lyra's eyes burned with a sudden rush of emotion. She didn't dare say it out loud in case she was wrong, but every instinct in her screamed the same thing. Help had come. The roar above deepened. shaking the bunker so hard that dust poured down like rain. Outside, in the smoking ruins of the city, a beam of pure white light cut through the clouds. The first Terran ship broke into full view, a massive dreadnought with a black and silver hull, the emblem of the Terran Navy shining like a promise in the fire-lit sky. The people in the bunker gasped. Some fell to their knees. The name of the Navy had been spoken only in stories for so long that it had felt like a legend. Now it was here, in steel and fire, right above their heads. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the engines wash over her. She didn't know how they had come or why now, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was this. They weren't alone anymore, and for the first time since the siege began, the people of Velthra dared to believe they might live to see another sunrise. High above Velthra, the clouds split apart under the heat of engines burning brighter than the sun's. The first Terran dreadnought roared into full view, its hull a wall of dark silver bristling with weapon turrets. Behind it, more ships poured. Through the clouds, each one larger and deadlier than the last. They moved in perfect formation, like a single living thing. Their engines casting long streaks of light across the smoky sky. The Zareth Dominion fleet reacted instantly. Enemy cruisers shifted into attack positions, their dark, jagged hulls turning toward the intruders. From the ground, Velthran soldiers could see them breaking away from the blockade, moving to meet the newcomers head-on. The sky became a dance of movement, giant warships closing in on each other. Their paths lit by the flash of charging weapons. The first shot came from the Zareth side. A massive plasma beam lanced across the sky, striking the shields of the lead Terran dreadnought. The air rippled with the force of the impact, but the human ship didn't slow. Instead, its forward cannons opened fire, unleashing a railgun shot, so powerful that the air itself seemed to shatter. The projectile punched clean through the enemy cruiser, slicing it apart in a burst of fire. From the bunker, Lyra and the others could hear the deep booms echoing down from the heavens. The ground trembled beneath them as the battle above shook the atmosphere. Every explosion felt like a drumbeat in the chest. The Terrans were not holding back. They were hitting the enemy with precision, every shot finding a target. Smaller Terran ships broke formation, diving into the thick of the enemy lines. These were the strike fighters, sleek, fast, and armed with weapons built for close combat. They weaved between the towering enemy battleships, dropping torpedoes and unleashing streams of cannon fire. One enemy destroyer tried to turn its guns on them, but a Terran bomber swept in from above, dropping a payload that tore the ship in half. The Zareth fought back hard. Swarms of their smaller attack craft poured out from hangar bays, chasing the Terran fighters. The sky turned into a storm of red and blue tracers as the two sides clashed in brutal dogfights. From the ground, it was like watching stars collide. On the bridge of the TNS Horizon, Commander Graves stood at the command table, giving orders with calm precision. "Keep pressure on their flank. Don't let them regroup," he ordered. The crew moved like a single unit, adjusting power to shields, redirecting weapons, fire, and calling out enemy movements. A communications officer's voice cut through the noise. Enemy flagship moving into firing range. Graves turned sharply toward the main screen. The Zareth flagship was enormous, its black hull jagged like the shell of a predator. Energy flared along its sides as its main weapons charged. Graves didn't hesitate. All forward batteries, fire at will. The Horizon unleashed everything it had. Railgun slugs, missile salvos, and beam cannons struck the enemy flagship in rapid succession. Other Terran ships joined in, focusing their fire until the enemy's shields finally cracked. A final torpedo from the ISS Valiant tore through its center. and the flagship erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the entire battlefield. On the ground, the sight was met with stunned silence at first. Then a cheer rose from the Velthran. Soldiers echoing through the ruins of the city. For the first time in months, they were watching the enemy fall back. But the battle wasn't over. The Zereth fleet still had numbers, and they fought with desperation. Several Terran ships took heavy damage, one even breaking apart and falling through the atmosphere in a trail of fire. Yet the human fleet didn't falter. Every time an enemy tried to break away and regroup, Terran fighters cut them down. Every time a cruiser tried to flank, a destroyer moved in to block its path. Lyra pressed closer to the bunker's sealed door, her hands against the cold metal. She couldn't see the battle, but she could feel it, the rhythm of explosions, the roar of engines, the deep hum that had first given her hope, now shaking the ground beneath her. She imagined the Terran ships pushing forward, carving a path through the enemy lines. Then came a sound different from the rest, a deep, rolling boom that made the air itself vibrate. Above the city, the largest Terran dreadnought, Sol's Wrath, fired its main cannon. The blast was so bright it lit the ruins like daylight. When the light faded, an entire cluster of Zereth ships was gone, reduced to burning wreckage drifting in the sky. Panic rippled through the Zereth ranks. Without their flagship and with heavy losses mounting, their formations began to crumble. Terran ships pressed the advantage, driving them further and further back. The sky over Velthra cleared, piece by piece, as enemy ships fled or were destroyed. Inside the bunker, the cums crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer. Velthra command. This is the United Terran Navy. Hold your positions. The skies are yours again. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the bunker erupted in cheers, laughter, and sobs of relief. Families clung to one another, soldiers dropped their weapons in exhaustion, and the elders looked at each other with tears in their eyes. Lyra stayed near the door, her breath shaking. They weren't out of danger yet, the ground forces were. Still out there, but the impossible had happened. The most powerful fleet in human history had come, and they had torn the enemy from the sky. And somewhere above, among the stars, the Terrans were already preparing for the next move. The battle in the skies had ended, but the war on the ground was still far from over. The Zareth had left hundreds of troops, war machines, and fortified positions across Velthra's surface. From the bunker, the rumble of their engines could still be heard in the distance. Along with the sharp cracks of weapons fire, the air inside the bunker was tense, but different now. For the first time in months, the people had heard words of hope. The skies are yours again. Many still didn't believe it completely, afraid it was a trick or a dream. But Lyra knew it was real. She had felt the power of the Terran fleet. In the vibrations of the ground, in the silence of the enemy guns above. Suddenly, a loud metallic thud echoed through the tunnel leading to the surface. Soldiers raised their rifles, aiming at the blast doors. A moment later, a deep voice came through a speaker outside. Velthra command, this is Commander Elias Graves of the United Terran Navy. Request permission to enter. The words sent a shock through the bunker. People turned to one another, whispering in disbelief. A human commander was here, on their planet. The blast doors unlocked with a heavy clank, and a shaft of bright daylight cut into the dim bunker. The dust in the air glittered as it swirled in the light. Then, through the opening, figures appeared. The first was a tall human in dark navy armor, his helmet under one arm. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and calm. Behind him, more humans entered, soldiers in full battle gear, their armor scuffed from the fight above. They moved with practiced precision, scanning the room, making sure it was safe. For a moment, the Velthrans just stared. Most of them had never seen a human before, except in old images. The humans seemed heavier, more solid, their armor gleaming even under the layer of dust from the city. Commander Graves stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "We're here to help. The skies are secure, but the Xerath still control much of the city. We'll be coordinating with your defense forces to push them back." One of the Velthran elders, Vorin, approached slowly. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We called for help. Decades ago, they told us that Terrans wouldn't come." Graves didn't hesitate. "We came. That's what matters." Around them, the human soldiers began unloading crates, weapons, medical supplies, ration packs. Velthran soldiers hurried to assist, their hands trembling as they lifted the sleek Terran rifles. These weapons were far more advanced than anything they had left. Lyra moved closer, her eyes fixed on the human commander. She could see the exhaustion in his face, but also something else: determination. He looked at her for a brief moment, and in that silent exchange, she felt a promise. They weren't going to leave until this was over. The humans wasted no time. A holographic map of the city was projected onto the bunker wall. Red markers showed enemy positions, while blue symbols marked Velthran survivors. Graves pointed at the map. "We'll split into 3 strike teams. One will secure the main square, another will clear the enemy's forward barracks, and the third will flank from the old industrial sector. We need to cut off their supply lines before nightfall." Velthran officers nodded, quickly moving to relay the orders. The room was buzzing with energy now. Fear was still there, but it had been pushed aside by action. Within minutes, the first joint team was ready to move out. Human and Velthran soldiers stood side by side, their weapons loaded, their armor marked by different worlds, but now united by the same cause. The blast doors opened wider, revealing the ruined streets beyond. The city was a graveyard of shattered buildings, burned vehicles, and drifting smoke. The sunlight filtered weakly through the haze, casting long shadows across the rubble. The sound of battle grew louder as they moved out. Somewhere in the distance, a Xerath war machine let out a mechanical roar, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Terran soldiers adjusted their rifles, eyes sharp. They advanced through the streets in tight formation. Lyra stayed with the second unit, moving carefully between the crumbling walls. The humans moved differently than Velthran soldiers. Their steps were deliberate, their eyes scanning every rooftop and alley. When they spotted movement ahead, they signaled silently, spreading out before firing. The first clash came near the old market square. Xerath troops opened fire from behind a barricade of metal scraps. The humans didn't hesitate. They moved forward under covering fire, their weapons spitting blue-white bursts that punched through enemy armor. Velthran fighters followed, firing from the side. The barricade fell within minutes, the enemy soldiers retreating under the heavy assault as they pushed forward. Civilians began to appear, thin, dust-covered figures emerging from hiding places. Some were too shocked to speak, but when they saw the human soldiers, a wave of relief passed over their faces by the time they reached the main plaza. The Xerath were falling back faster. Terran air support roared overhead, dropping precision strikes on enemy strongpoints. The sound was deafening, the ground trembling with each impact. Lyra found herself fighting alongside a human soldier barely older than she was. He tossed her an extra energy cell without a word, then moved to cover her flank. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just a rescue. This was a war fought together, side by side. Hours later, the plaza was secure. The Terran and Velthran flags were raised, together over the battered city center. Smoke still rose in the distance, but here, for the first time, the people could stand in the open without fear of the sky above. Commander Graves stood at the edge of the square, scanning the horizon. "We're not done," he said quietly too. His second-in-command, "The Zareth won't give up easily, but we've broken their grip. Now we finish this." Lyra stood nearby, her rifle in hand, watching the humans prepare for the next push. The day had begun with despair, but it was ending with a fire in her chest she hadn't felt in months, the fire of a fight they could actually win. And somewhere above, the Terran fleet still waited, ready to strike again if needed. The morning sky over Velthra was a dull gray, heavy with smoke and the smell of scorched metal. The city was quiet for the first time in weeks, but it was not the peace of safety. It was the silence before the last and most dangerous battle. The Zareth forces had pulled back during the night, retreating to the outskirts, but everyone knew they were not gone. They had gathered their remaining troops, war machines, and heavy artillery for one final push to crush the Velthrans before the Terrans could fully take control. Commander Graves stood in the main plaza, his armor dusty and marked with thin scorch lines from the fighting the day before. Around him, human and Velthran officers studied a holographic map that showed enemy positions in red. The Zareth had formed a defensive wall around the industrial district, the same place they were storing their last ammunition, reserves, and fuel supplies. If they were allowed to hold it, they could keep fighting for weeks. If it fell, the war on Velthra would be over. Graves' voice was calm, but sharp as he gave the order. "We hit them hard and fast. Strike teams will attack from 3 sides. Air support will cut off their escape. No more running. Today, this ends." The Velthran commander beside him, a tall woman with battle scars across her face, nodded firmly. "Our people will fight with you," she said. "We finish them together." Lyra was already suited up, standing among the second wave of soldiers. Her armor was patched and dented, her rifle fully charged. She had barely slept, but her mind was sharp, her heartbeat steady. She had lived under siege for so long that the idea of the enemy finally being gone felt unreal. Still, she was ready to make it real with her own hands. When the signal came, the Terran and Velthran forces moved as one. The streets filled with the thud of boots and the low hum of powered armor. Overhead, the shadow of Terran gunships swept across the ruins, their engines growling. The first explosions lit up the horizon as the outer barricades of the industrial district came under fire. The Zareth responded instantly, unleashing a wall of plasma fire from their fortified positions. Bright streaks cut through the smoke, striking the street in bursts of heat and sparks. Soldiers dove for cover behind broken walls and burned-out vehicles, returning fire in precise bursts. Terran heavy weapons hammered the barricades, chipping away at their defenses piece by piece. On the left flank, a squad of Velthran fighters charged forward, only to be pinned down by a massive Zareth war machine, a towering walker with twin cannons. The machine's blasts ripped through the street, sending chunks of stone flying. Just as it turned its guns on the trapped Velthrans, a Terran missile screamed down from above, striking the walker square in the chest. It collapsed in a heap of burning metal. And the Velthrans pushed forward with renewed strength. Lyra moved through the right flank with her unit, keeping low and firing at any Zareth soldier that showed their head. Beside her, a human soldier advanced with steady, disciplined shots, covering her each time she reloaded. They didn't need to speak. Each knew where the other would move next. The fighting grew more brutal the deeper they pushed. The Zareth fought with desperation, knowing this was their last stand. In one alley, the air was thick with the smell of burned metal and the high-pitched whine of charging plasma rifles. Every corner held danger, an ambush, a sniper, or a hidden mine. But slowly, block by block, the Terran Velthran forces closed in. Then came the turning point. In the center of the district, the enemy's main artillery platform roared to life, preparing to fire on the city center. If it succeeded, it would level the plaza and everything in it. Graves himself led the charge toward it, cutting down Zareth. Soldiers in his path. Velthran fighters swarmed after him, their war cries echoing through the streets. Lyra saw it too. The massive platform, its cannons glowing brighter as they charged. Without thinking, she broke from her squad, sprinting through a side street to get a better angle. She slid into cover behind a pile of rubble, lifted her rifle, and fired at the exposed targeting sensors on the gun. Her first shots missed, but the third struck home, sending sparks flying. The weapon's aim faltered just long enough for a tape steel, long enough for a tase. A tape's haze, a luxurious texture that glides on smoothly. And lives tay, unlasting lies, log last day color. Tay's hard, my stage, my's play. I sighed some misely sistend. We saw some my's malize, Miss Cade malive. My malive, go aside of me. Will I be a cov's eyes, by we I have. But we cicade it was it, kite it, unclide it, caside it, unkite it, secrete, I salad it, sit, it, clay it, it's it, the p, it's it, and Terran bomber overhead to lock on. A moment later, the entire platform exploded in a thunderous blast, the shockwave knocking Lyra off her feet. She landed hard, but rolled quickly to her knees, heart racing. Around her, cheers rose from both human and Velthran voices. The enemy's heaviest weapon was gone. With their artillery destroyed and their lines breaking, the Zareth began to fall back in chaos. Terran gunships strafed their retreat, while Velthran fighters pressed from the ground. The combined force was overwhelming, and within an hour, the last of the enemy was either captured, dead, or fleeing into the wilderness beyond the city. When the gunfire finally stopped, silence fell over the district. Smoke drifted lazily through the air, carrying with it the smell of victory and loss. Soldiers from both worlds moved among the wreckage, helping the wounded, collecting supplies, and marking the fallen. Lyra stood in the middle of the street, her rifle hanging loosely at her side. The sun broke through the smoke for the first time in months, casting golden light over the ruined city. She turned and saw Commander Graves walking toward her. His armor scratched, but his posture unshaken. "It's over," he said simply. She nodded, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. "We wouldn't have survived without you." Graves looked around at the Velthran soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with his own. "You fought just as hard," he said. "We didn't save you. We fought alongside you. Remember that?" All around them, the people of Velthra began to emerge from hiding. Civilians stepped into the streets, some with tears in their eyes, others holding on to their children. They looked up at the humans, not with fear, but with gratitude. That night, the city burned with light, not fire. Lanterns and beacons were lit across the ruins, and for the first time, the people celebrated instead of mourned. Human and Velthran voices mixed together in song and laughter. Their alliance sealed not by old treaties, but by the blood they had shed together. The Zareth were gone. Velthra was free, and in the quiet moments between the noise of victory, Lyra knew the galaxy had just witnessed something it would not forget the day the Terrans returned. And the day hope came back to her people. The days after the final battle were strangely quiet. The sounds of war, the constant bombardment, the roar of vengeance, the shouts of soldiers were gone. In their place came new sounds: the clang of tools, the hum of generators, and the voices of people working together to rebuild what had been destroyed. Velthra's capital was in ruins, but it was alive again. Streets once littered with rubble were slowly being cleared. Cranes and construction drones moved between damaged buildings, lifting heavy beams and repairing walls. Terran engineers worked side by side with Velthran builders. They're different, tools and techniques blending together. Where the enemy had left only wreckage, life was returning. Commander Graves walked through the city each morning, checking on the progress. He was not just there to command soldiers anymore. Now, he was helping to organize relief efforts. Supply drops came from orbit daily, bringing food, medicine, and shelter materials. Terran doctors treated the wounded in makeshift clinics, while Velthran healers taught them local remedies. Soldiers who had fought side by side in battle now carried crates, built shelters, and helped civilians find lost family members. Lyra had taken on a new role too. She moved between work crews, helping to direct rebuilding efforts. Her armor was gone now, replaced by simple work clothes. The rifle she had carried for so long sat in her quarters, unused. For the first time in months, she could walk through the streets without scanning for snipers or listening for enemy footsteps. But the scars of the war were everywhere. Every street carried reminders: burned-out vehicles, collapsed towers, and memorials for those who had not survived. People still spoke in quiet tones when they mentioned the Zareth, as if the memory itself was dangerous. Yet, mixed with that, fear was something stronger: gratitude. The Terrans had not only come when everyone believed they wouldn't, they had stayed. One afternoon, Lyra found Graves standing on a high terrace overlooking the city. From there, they could see the glint of Terran ships in the sky, slowly orbiting the planet. "You could have left after the battle," she said, walking up beside him. "But you stayed." Graves didn't look away from the horizon. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. If we leave too soon, the Zareth will come back. And even if they don't, rebuilding takes more than just courage. It takes time. She studied his face. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, his expression quieter. She could tell he had seen this before. Other worlds saved. Other wars fought other people who had looked at him the way her people did now. "They tell stories about this already," she said. "They say you appeared from the clouds like an old god with an army of steel and fire." That made him chuckle softly. "I'm no god, Lyra. Just a man with a fleet who remembered a promise." In the weeks that followed, the city began to feel like itself again. Children played in the open without fear. Traders set up stalls in the market square, and musicians returned to the plazas with their instruments. Each day, more lights came on at night as power was restored. Slowly, Velthra was becoming whole again. But eventually, the time came for the Terran fleet to leave. The Zareth had been pushed far beyond the system, and Velthra now had the weapons and defenses to protect itself. The Terrans had taught their soldiers new tactics, upgraded their ships, and fortified their borders. The next time the enemy came, they would be ready. On the day of departure, the plaza was full. Velthrans of every age gathered to see their allies off. Terran soldiers stood in formation beside them, exchanging handshakes, embraces, and promises to meet again. The flags of both worlds fluttered together in the warm breeze. Lyra walked with Graves to the shuttle that would take him back to the horizon. Neither spoke for a long moment. The noise of the crowd seemed far away. "You changed everything here," she said finally. He shook his head. "No, Lyra, you and your people did that. We just gave you the chance to fight." She looked at him steadily. "If we ever call again, will you come?" Graves smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried weight. "As long as there's breath in me, yes." The shuttle doors opened, and he stepped inside, turning once to give her a short nod. She stood there watching until the shuttle lifted off, rising into the bright sky before disappearing into the clouds. That night, Velthra's skies were filled with streaks of light as the Terran fleet jumped to hyperspace. The people watched in silence, not with sadness, but with pride. They knew they were not alone in the galaxy anymore. Somewhere out there, the Terrans were watching. Months later, life on Velthra had moved forward. The city was rebuilt. Trade with other worlds had resumed, and the memory of the siege had faded into the stories told around fires at night. And whenever Lyra walked through the market square and saw the two flags flying side by side, She felt the same fire in her chest she had felt the day the Terrans first appeared through the clouds, because she knew something the rest of the galaxy was beginning to learn again. When Earth answers a call for help, it does not come with whispers or half measures. It comes with the most powerful fleet in the stars, and it stays until the job is done. And in the dark corners of space, where the Zereth still lingered, the name of the Terran Navy was spoken in fear once more.